The freezing water of the Rubicon River swirls around the legs of Julius Caesar's horse. It is January 10th, 49 BC. Caesar stands on the northern bank, staring at the mud. If he stays here, his political enemies in Rome will strip his command, drag him into court, and destroy him. If he crosses this stream with his army, he is committing treason. He is declaring war on the Roman Republic. His men are silent. They are waiting for one word. Caesar knows that once his boots hit the southern bank, there is no turning back. He mutters, "The die is cast," and spurs his horse forward. That single splash in the water ended the Roman Republic. Caesar didn't just win a civil war, he broke a system of government that had lasted 500 years. He paved the way for the Roman Empire, a centralized power structure that would dominate the Mediterranean for centuries and define Western law, language, and architecture. By choosing his own survival over the sanctity of the law, Caesar forced the world into the age of emperors. History is usually a slow crawl of demographics and economics. Sometimes it's just one person making a call in a tent. Napoleon Bonaparte sat in the Tuileries Palace in 1803, staring at a map of North America. He was broke. He had a massive slave revolt in Haiti that was bleeding his treasury dry. He had a looming war with Great Britain that would require every ship and every cannon he could muster. He owned 828,000 square miles of territory in the middle of the American continent, but he couldn't defend it. He knew the British Navy would seize it the moment the first shot was fired in Europe. Napoleon called his ministers. He didn't just want to sell New Orleans. He wanted to dump the entire territory. He offered the Louisiana Purchase to Thomas Jefferson for $15 million. That's roughly 4 cents an acre. With one stroke of a pen, Napoleon abandoned his dreams of a French empire in the New World to fund his conquest of the Old World. He doubled the size of the United States overnight. He turned a struggling coastal nation into a potential global superpower. He traded a continent for a few years of war chest money. He thought he was being pragmatic. He actually handed the keys of the 20th century to the Americans. The French Empire rose and fell, but the borders Napoleon drew stayed put. Power shifted back to Europe, and by May 1940, the continent was screaming. Winston Churchill was trapped in a basement. France had collapsed. The British Expeditionary Force was being chewed to pieces on the beaches of Dunkirk. The German Luftwaffe was preparing to rain fire on London. Inside the British War Cabinet, the pressure was suffocating. Some officials wanted to use Mussolini as a middleman to cut a deal with the Axis powers. The logic was sound. Britain was alone. Its army was beaten. A peace treaty would save the British Empire from total annihilation. Churchill looked at the men in the room and realized that a negotiated peace was just a slow-motion surrender. He knew the enemy's word was worthless. He refused to even open the channel. He told his cabinet that if this long history of the island was to end, it should end only when they had fought to the very last. He chose total resistance when total defeat was the only logical outcome. That refusal to talk didn't just save Britain, it kept a bridgehead open for the United States to eventually enter the war. It ensured that the vision of a fascist Europe would hit a wall of British defiance. If Churchill had sent that telegram to Rome, the world would be a much darker place today. 5 years later, the war Churchill refused to quit ended in a flash of heat hotter than the sun. Harry S. Truman had been president for less than 4 months. He sat at his desk with a report that estimated 1 million American casualties if the United States invaded the Japanese home islands. The Japanese military was preparing for a total suicide stand. Truman had a new weapon, tested only once in the New Mexico desert. It was a gamble of physics and morality. He didn't consult a committee for the final yes. He gave the order to deploy the Manhattan Project's creations. On August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second hit Nagasaki. Truman didn't hesitate. He saw it as a tactical necessity to end a meat grinder war and save millions of lives on both sides. The decision killed over 100,000 people instantly and forced a surrender within days. But the fallout was bigger than the cities. Truman's decision birthed the atomic age. He showed the world that humanity now possessed the specific technology required to delete itself. The Cold War started the moment those mushroom clouds cleared. The world spent the next 40 years living under the shadow of the button, a concept Truman made real. The tension of that atomic age eventually came down to a man who decided to do absolutely nothing. Mikhail Gorbachev looked at the intelligence reports in 1989. Eastern Europe was on fire. Protests were tearing through Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. In East Germany, the crowds were massive, demanding the right to cross into the West. Every Soviet leader before him, Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, had a standard operating procedure for this. Send in the tanks, crush the dissent, keep the Iron Curtain closed by force. The Red Army was mobilized and ready. Gorbachev stayed his hand. He signaled to the satellite states that the Soviet Union would not intervene in their internal affairs. When the crowds at the Berlin Wall began to pick at the concrete with hammers, the guards looked to Moscow for orders to fire. The orders never came. Gorbachev chose to let the empire crumble rather than start a third world war to save a failing ideology. He sat in his office while the map of the world was redrawn in a single weekend. He presided over the peaceful collapse of a superpower. One man decided to cross a river and build an empire. One man decided to sell a wilderness and build a rival. One man refused to talk and saved a continent. One man used a bomb and changed the nature of war. One man kept his tanks in the garage and ended a century of fear. History isn't a series of accidents. It's a series of people standing in a room, weighing the cost and finally saying go. The silence in the Kremlin during those final months of 1989 was a physical weight. Mikhail Gorbachev knew that by refusing to use force, he was signing the death warrant of his own career. He was the head of a system designed for total control. Yet he chose to be the first leader in Soviet history to let go. He watched the Berlin Wall fall on a television screen, just like the rest of the world. He didn't order the MiGs to scramble. He didn't authorize mass arrests. By doing nothing, he fundamentally altered the genetic code of global geopolitics. He traded the survival of the Soviet Union for the survival of the human race. The ripple effects of these single moments are still hitting us. We live in the echoes of these rooms. When Julius Caesar's boots hit the mud of the Rubicon, he didn't just start a war. He invented the concept of the great man of history. He proved that a single personality could be more powerful than a 500-year-old constitution. Every dictator and strongman who has risen since 49 BC is a ghost of Caesar's decision. He showed that the law is only as strong as the people willing to enforce it. When he crossed that line, he deleted the idea of collective rule and replaced it with the cult of the individual. Napoleon's decision to sell Louisiana was a different kind of ego play. He was a master of the short-term win. He needed the cash to fight his enemies in Europe, and he got it. But in the process, he committed a strategic error that changed the gravity of the planet. By selling that land, he removed the French buffer that kept the United States trapped on the East Coast. He gave the Americans the Mississippi River, the Great Plains, in the port of New Orleans. He essentially built the platform for the American century. Without Napoleon's 1803 fire sale, the United States remains a regional power. Instead, Napoleon accidentally created the only power that would eventually be capable of changing European history twice in the 20th century. Churchill's 1940 standoff remains the ultimate test of human willpower. Logic told him to negotiate. Economics told him to negotiate. His own advisors told him to negotiate. If he had listened, the dark ideologies of the time would have likely dominated the entire European continent without interference. The United Kingdom would have become a client state. There would have been no liberation. There would have been no free world. Churchill's no was the only thing standing between a total nightmare and the future we have now. He proved that morale is a strategic resource as valuable as oil or steel. He held the door open for the rest of history to pass through. Truman's decision to use the bomb remains the most debated choice in the history of command. He didn't have the luxury of hindsight. He only had a casualty projection and a weapon that worked. When he authorized those missions, he ended the age of traditional warfare. He made it so that two superpowers could never truly fight each other again without risking everything. Every diplomatic move made since 1945 has been calculated against the backdrop of Truman's choice. He turned war from a game of territory into a game of ultimate stakes. These 5 men didn't have special information. They didn't have a crystal ball. They were just people standing at a crossroads where one path led to the status quo and the other led to a total break with the past. They chose the break. They chose to be the ones who flipped the switch. History isn't a straight line. It's a series of sharp turns made by individuals who weren't afraid to take the lead. They changed the world not because they knew exactly what would happen, but because they were the only ones willing to act.